I had quite a battle trying to get this last third video loaded, and now I'm going really high tech. You'll be amazed at how technologically adept I really am. While I, oops, I'm telling you, I'm a mess. But I went all this work to tape this thing, record this thing. So here we go. Let's see if I can finish up with this one more video. The bottom of 108, Wood begins a paragraph. My second important consideration for understanding Scripture is the Protestant doctrine of perspicuity. Now, this is not a widespread, often appealed to idea. So, perspicuity. And then he tells us what it means. When the Bible speaks clearly on a subject, it does so infallibly and with absolute authority. So this is a Protestant doctrine, traditional. This is not some aberrant modern doctrinal authority. Modern doctrinal innovation. This has been standard Reformation teaching for 500 years. But then he makes this acknowledgement. On the other hand, we must also recognize the details of this doctrine. Traditionally, so now he's going to go against this tradition in Protestantism. Traditionally, perspicuity means that the teachings necessary for salvation are clear, not that everything in the Bible is perfectly understandable, or that it speaks, I would say, infallibly and with absolute authority. Now, so he shifted away from the kind of criterion that I've been talking about in class, and that the Church of the Nazarene's manual statement does specify and uphold, and that is all things necessary to our salvation. Now, I got to admit, what's up for grabs there is, well, what is necessary to our salvation? Is it clear? How do we determine what things are necessary and what things are not? So while I like the article on the Holy Scriptures in the Church of the Nazarene Manual, we ought not to pretend that just because the Nazarene Manual says it's on matters of salvation that the Bible inherently reveals God's will for us. Because again, there still could be disagreement about what matters or what is necessary to salvation. I think it's important to acknowledge that. In other words, problems don't go away too easily. But I'm thinking, okay, we're going to call that a Protestant doctrine. And then I mentioned in class the other day, Martin Luther, the great reformer. Let me give you two examples just from Martin Luther, of very different nature. One, as I mentioned in class, Martin Luther, to my knowledge, all the way to his dying day, refused the growing evidence of not a geocentric, we'll say, universe. Gee whiz, they didn't even have much idea about the universe. But, for Luther, the planet, our world, was at the center. And as the evidence mounted that no, in fact, our world revolves around the sun, Luther rejected it because he was convinced that the Bible clearly teaches that, for one thing, the earth does not move. It stays stationary while everything revolves around it. And he appealed to various psalms to support this. Now, I will admit that Wood in this book says we may need to shift our interpretations of some biblical passages, but I'll tell you, he's got his heels dug in pretty stubbornly on some of this, especially I read Genesis as largely describing history, as he says on 109. So again, the point here is that he has shifted whatever we might think about the Protestant doctrine of perspicuity. And any such doctrine as this is never as simple as straightforward as it might appear at first. But on top of that, Wood is extending its traditional meaning, having to do with salvation, to the Bible Bible as a scientific textbook. I was going to mention Luther. So on the one is about his stubbornness about Earth being at the center of God's creative reality, we might say. Luther also, as a Protestant, right? He's the father of the Reformation. Luther, to his dying day, insisted that the Gospels are quite clear, that Jesus, said, "This is my body," and the Gospels do say that Jesus said during that Last Supper with his disciples as he took the bread and broke it, "This is my body given for you." And Luther never, ever veered away from a deep, strong conviction that the bread of Holy Communion really does include, or is right there in that bread is the flesh of Jesus. He said it's clear. You can't really deny this. He got into a big debate with another reformer named Ulrich Zwingli, and this was their main sticking point. Zwingli wanted to think the way most of us who grew up in evangelical churches were taught to think, which is, well, it's a way to remember. And that's called the memorial interpretation, remembering of Jesus' crucifixion, his death for us. Luther, against Zwingli, insisted that those words of Jesus should be taken literally. So, how much help is the doctrine of perspicuity when we think about cases like that? I'm going to, I think, move, I'll wrap this up. I do appreciate whenever he takes to task other creationists, young earth creationists, who he thinks don't really know squat about the evolutionary theory. And he does know squat, and he knows a lot of squat. He knows way more squat than I do. But he still refuses to accept what he knows is compelling evidence. Frankly, folks, that's where it starts to really frustrate me. It really does. I have to admit that. 113, 4 lines down. We need to recognize, he writes, that evolutionists have come up with a lot of data. Sounds a little bit too much like, gee whiz, where'd they dig that up? He knows that they didn't just come up with it. And that data is becoming more and more convincing. I almost want to say every day. That might be an overstatement. But he says, on the surface, makes a strong case for their theory. Instead of dismissing it, we need to come up with a better explanation of the data. We need to ask honest questions and search hard for the answers. So he gives a couple of examples. If we have not evolved from apes, why did God make us with such strong resemblance to apes? Fair question. Pretty good question. Now, especially given that I think since the time he wrote this book, the evidence from genetic mapping has become even more compelling about the history of mutations, and we can virtually date them. I mean, not down to the day or anything, but there are mutations in the genetic record that people far smarter than I am about these things, and Daryl Falk is definitely one of them, who would just point this out. To me, this is more compelling than fossils by far. He goes on to say, if Neanderthals are not our cousins, then what are they? Well, the fact of the matter is, we now know that probably just about all of us, just between you and me, and I don't think he minds me saying this, one of our sons-in-law, our second daughter's husband, whom I love, and he and Heather, our daughter, just gave us a wonderful little grandson, less than 2 years ago now. He was the one that told us, I have a higher than average percentage of Neanderthal DNA in my genealogy, in my makeup, my genetic makeup. I give him a hard, I kid him about that because we all have some. So, I mean, unless all this genetic map reading is just baloney. And there's just no reason to think that. We are related to the creatures that we call Neanderthals. They are our cousins. And that's what they are. I mean, if you can use the term cousins anyway. If light from distant stars doesn't confirm that the universe is billions of years old, what does it tell us? Well, you could scratch your head and you could do mental gymnastics till you're very blue in the face. I know I'm coming on strong about this. But it frustrates me because there's this, not even implicit, but right up on the surface, distrust of the human capacity to observe the world. We're not going to be right about everything, no, and things do change a little bit. Science isn't static, nor should we expect it to be. But a theory isn't simply like just a good idea that some people came up with and they're going to run with it. In science, a theory is tested. It's tested by many people. It's debated. But when the evidence comes home, and I'm going to tell you again, I'm a theologian. I don't claim to be a biologist or a geneticist or a geologist or a physicist, but I'm willing to trust the people, by and large, who do these things, especially, I'm going to emphasize this now, especially when they are my friends and colleagues at a place like this, Point Loma Nazarene University. I think it's a beautiful, symbolic kind of situation that the School of Theology building is directly across Calf Lane from the big, beautiful, science building of just a few years old. I can't remember what we call it, but, why don't I remember what we call it? But that lovely, the science is right there, right across Calf Lane. We're not in competition with them. And I'm truly, some of my best friends are biologists who are convinced by the data of evolutionary science. And I have no cotton-picking good reason not to trust the work they do. Does that then force me to read Genesis differently? Well, differently than I did when I was in high school, for sure. Absolutely, of course. Just like science changes, so does, biblical scholarship or my awareness of it, my growing in it. Now I'm an old man. I still got lots to learn. I know that. I think I'll just say again, what frustrates me, and I don't know what better verb to use, and you can push back at me in class or in your papers, it's okay. You probably won't convince me, but you can certainly push back on me. What frustrates me is that Todd knows all this data, and he knows it's compelling. But because he has this assumption about how Genesis functions, he's actually refusing to take that data seriously. Doesn't that seem kind of frustrating? I mean, yeah, he's being, standing by his convictions. There's a point at which we ought to be willing to trust that God has given us minds, and that part of what it means to be human, it's not the only thing, but part of what it means to be human is to exercise those minds, to do the hard work of observing the world and interpreting what we see. We can go wrong, yes we can, but when the evidence seems to mount from various scientific disciplines and it starts to come together, as I believe it does, in terms of things like age of the earth, age of the universe, the evolution of life on this planet, it doesn't force us to abandon God. It doesn't force us to abandon our Christian faith. It will likely force us to rethink some things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'll just end again by saying you'd be hard-pressed to find any Lutherans today who are as worried about keeping the earth at the center of God's universe as Martin Luther was. We're over that. We've been over it a while. And these other things, we'll get over them as well. It may take time, and sometimes it's painful. And again, I'm not under any illusion that I'll convince you all. Many of you, I know I don't need to convince. So I'm just trying to be honest with you as we press on through this material. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. I look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Oh.